The following podcast is created and sponsored by High Beam Ministry.
You have just no idea the harm that watching pornographic images does to your soul. It snatches your soul from you. And I think the whole issue about pornography in our country is to a certain extent the battle for the soul of our country.
The sex industry is the largest and most profitable industry in the world. This includes street prostitution, strip clubs, phone sex, and pornography. 13,000 adult videos are produced annually, amassing over $13 billion in profit. By comparison, Hollywood released 507 movies and made only $8.8 billion. The porn industry also makes more money than the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, and Major League Baseball combined. They also make more than NBC, CBS, and ABC combined. And if that's not enough, they have larger revenues than top technology companies such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, Apple, and Netflix combined. At any given second of the day, there are as much as 30 million unique visitors visiting porn sites. Just about half of the internet is made up of porn or porn-related content. A University of Montreal study found that most guys are exposed to porn for the first time at age 10. There are over 68 million daily searches for pornography in the United States, which is about 25% of all daily searches. The United States is the top producer of pornographic DVDs and web material. The second largest is Germany. In fact, every 39 minutes a new porn film is created in the United States. 20% of American men admit that they access pornography at work. Internet porn in the UK receives more traffic than social networks, shopping, gaming, finance, and travel. Several recent studies have found that teenagers from all over the world use porn to learn about real-life sex. Though true, women do watch porn, most studies show that women watch far less porn than men. 10% of adults admit to legitimately have an online porn addiction.
Welcome to the Ersatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can catch me and this podcast on my websites, truthbarista.com, all one word, truthbarista.com, and highbeamministry.com. That's HIGHBEAM ministry.com, as in car high beam. We're shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead.
Hi, Truth Barista. It's so nice to see you. I feel like every time I see you, I've got this issue that has come into my life.
Oh, what is it?
Well, last night I went to Google a word that I was researching on something, and up pops this pornography site. And
no.
Oh yeah, and I know better than to sit there and gawk at it. But I got rid of it. But I probably lingered a little too long on the site, and I thought to myself, no wonder so many people have problems with, pornography. I mean, it's almost like it gets a hold of you and just drags you into its web.
Yeah, no kidding. In fact, I share your same views on that one. I mean, we're living in such a sex-saturated society right now. It is unbelievable. It's on the news, or on the tube. It's on the computer. It's on music.
You go to the movies.
You go to the movie. I mean, everywhere you go, it's in advertising. Even just walking down the street, you look at a billboard or at a bus stop or whatever, and oh my gosh, it's like sex is all over everywhere.
Well, it's that craving, right? I mean, the Bible talks a lot about coveting, and of course that's kind of an old word, sort of, but a new word would be craving. There's a craving within us to want more of something that probably doesn't belong to us.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you what, having that crave inside of you, let me give you an example of something that happened to me. I like playing computer games every once in a while, and I was looking for some cheat codes because I got stuck on a particular thing. So I go on the internet.
Just a second here.
Yeah?
You said cheat codes.
Well, yeah.
Pastor.
Yes. Cheat codes. Everybody knows cheat codes. It's workarounds, Okay, so anyway, whatever. So I've got on the site for cheat codes, and all of a sudden this pop-up pops up. And what is it? I kid you not, Larry. It was a topless woman. And this is on a teenager's site.
Wow.
Of course, I had to, get that out of the way fast. But it was a classic pop-up. Sometimes when you put something into a search engine, it'll redirect you because somebody's hijacked that particular website address called a redirect, and it'll put you someplace you don't want to be. So, man, we got to have filters on our computers, got to have filters on our phones. But you know something? We need an internal filter. That's the thing that we really need to develop.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I was so disturbed by it, I did some Googling, and I asked the Google, Mr. Google, if he would, answer a couple of questions I had. And one was, how many Christian leaders, pastors, etc., are involved in the internet pornography sites? And they came up with 57% of pastors have stated they have had problems with the pornography sites.
Now, is that in the past, or is that currently?
Well, it's kind of an ongoing thing. You know, a lot of pastors certainly don't want to admit to any kind of that kind of activity because that could mean the loss of their jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
But they did say 57%. It's even higher for youth pastors at 64%. And so I just think of that high of rate just to be on these internet sites and the fact that there's a craving drawing them in. I mean, it is really Satan's ploy to destroy the spiritual leaders in our country.
Yeah, pornography is a soul stealer. And not only is it a soul stealer, it's a life stealer. It's a relationship killer. It actually changes us physically. And there's more and more research that's coming out. In fact, I've got something I want to read to you eventually on this one, but it is just amazing what happens. Now, getting back to that 57% of pastors and 64% of youth, that says something to me because I just saw a recent survey that says the generation of millennials find pornography far less of a threat than the previous generation does. And to me, that speaks of the biblical principle of the fathers eat the sour grapes, but the children's teeth are set on edge. And what that means is what is sin in one generation will find its effects and be more accepted in the second generation. And if you really look at where we're at now, the sexual revolution started in the 60s, and it started hitting its peak in the early 70s. And that's where the whole Stonewall conflict with homosexuality came about, and Playboy was hitting its stride in the 60s, and then you started getting harder core pornography out there like Penthouse and others, and pretty soon that stuff started ramping up. Then you add the technology of the internet on there, and suddenly you're wondering why in the 80s and the 90s are we seeing an exponential increase in sexual assaults? And even today, I mean, in the recent election, what was the accusation?
Always
sexual assault, sexual assault, sexual assault. And whether it was true or not, it is a problem in our society. And I know, because it's a no-brainer, that pornography is feeding into this. Now, the question is, what makes pornography so appealing?
Well, and I think that is what we're going to unpack. I just want to say one thing before you unpack it, Truth Barista, and that is when you raised the issue of the latest election and how sexual innuendos were thrown out there. But the Bible says, Paul says in 2 Timothy 3:13, that men will wax worse and worse, or that evil will flourish, and they will be deceived and deceive others. And that's what we're seeing. And the internet is deceiving, and it's deceiving others. And that's our problem.
And not only that, Paul is writing that in the end times, men will become lovers of self and lovers of pleasure. Could we say that just before the end hits, you're going to see people become very selfish, that love will grow cold? And by the way, pornography really leads to love growing cold because it's not love anymore, it's lust. And it's for self-pleasure rather than intimacy with the other person. So we could say, yeah, that's going to come at the end. But since there's such a flood of it in the world today, are we approaching the end? And we discussed that in a previous talk. But
well, you're going to talk, I know, about Jesus, because that's a perfect lead-in to this whole thing. And he talks about that if you lust after somebody. But, you know, it's a craving. That lust is like a craving. Nobody knows what that craving could be except for you, right?
Right. Let me unpack this a little bit. You mentioned it. Jesus said, you've heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman, now here's the key phrase, to lust for her, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So let's unpack two things that we've got here. He's talking about adultery, which is voluntary sexual intercourse between a married person and a partner other than the lawful spouse. How many husbands, how many wives are secretly involved or openly involved with pornography? That is, in a sense, inviting somebody else into the intimate relationship between a married couple. That is technically adultery. Now, that to lust for her, that's actually getting back to what you were talking about. The biblical word is covet. Best way I can describe it is a craving for something, especially if it belongs to another person. What is pornography? It is a craving for the other person's body, and it doesn't belong to you. Even if you just take it through visual means, that is a craving. That is coveting. The sense of covet, Larry, is an eager desire. It's a desire that reaches out to take, to lust for someone or something in order to possess it. Now, don't covet is a really interesting command by God because all of the other commands are actions. This command deals with the thoughts. And only God can command that a person deal with their thoughts because only He can judge thoughts accurately. Okay, now rabbis, you know I studied the Jewish roots of this stuff, right? The rabbis point out that if there was no coveting, many of the other commands would never be broken because sin really starts in the longing, not the act. And this is exactly where Jesus, who is the rabbi of his day and the supreme rabbi, this is where he starts. He's going, if you just start in the longing, if you feed the craving, if you do the lingering look, you've already committed the act because you're already on the road to committing the act.
Wow, that is so profound. I mean, I just think, there's a lot of thoughts I can't control. It just seems like I'm walking down the street. For example, if we're talking about lust or craving, and there's a beautiful woman, all of a sudden I look and I think, I mean, is that the same kind of thing if it's a quick look? I mean, let's just unpack that for a little bit because I think everybody has a certain amount of respect for beauty, or your eye is attracted to the appealing.
You're right, because that's why I pointed out the key phrase what Jesus is talking about is he says, to lust for her. In the literal translation, it means to desire her, and in the Amplified Bible, it says, with evil desire for her. This is not about the casual, innocent, appreciative glance. I've got a friend who does this. He walks down the street and a beautiful woman will walk by, and he'll turn to me and he goes, wow, nice work, God. It just cracks me up. And, and women, go ahead.
Well, I want to know if that same guy looks at something not quite so pretty, kind of ugly. Way to go, God. I mean, you didn't do as good on this one. That's like, terrible.
I know, it's terrible. But at the same time, it shows the difference between the lingering, lustful, desiring, I want that crave versus something that simply appreciates beauty, okay? The casual glance is not what Jesus is talking about. It's the lingering look that comes from lust and the desire to have. The covetous look is what gets everything rolling inside a person. And the problem is, this comes from the struggle between our God-given desires and our flesh-driven desires that go all the way back to create. Oh, wait a minute. Let's hold this thought. I got to go talk to the customer over here. I'll be right back. Sit with the coffee. I'll grab you something else from the bakery.
Oh, great.
Hi, this is Jay, the Truth Barista. Remember, all good coffee is worth the price. Each week, the Truth Barista brews up discussion on current and relevant issues that is also worth the price. And we hope you will help us maintain this weekly podcast by tipping the Truth Barista. And you can go online and do that at GoFundMe.com. You can find that link on our website, TruthBarista.com. Okay, here you go. Here's your kolache.
Oh, thanks.
Were you having a craving for the kolache?
I was having a craving. My whole life was just captured by the
you
look
were coveting
and the smell
the
of
kolache. Yes. Okay. Well, it's not coveting because you actually purchased it. It does belong to you. So now you have the appreciative desire for the kolache. So you sit there and enjoy. Let me get back to what I was talking about. When we were talking about the whole desire thing, it's a struggle between what God has given us as far as desires and how those desires become flesh driven all the way back to creation. And there's this old Adam and Eve joke out there. It wasn't the problem with the apple in the tree. It was the problem with the pear on the ground. Oh, good afternoon, everybody.
Wow.
Now, think
When does
about,
the show begin?
I tell you, I'll be here all week. Anyway, what really happened is that God gave all of our bodily desires to us. And he proclaimed these things very good. And to some puritanical Christians, they go, well, sex, it's a dirty thing. No, God gave it to us, and in the act of sexual relationship, it builds intimacy, and because of the hormonal release and the things that go on in our bodies, especially our brains and things, this creates a bonding with the other person. That's why it was given to us. It was not given so that we could share it around with a whole bunch of people. It was to strengthen the one-to-one marriage relationship. But after the fall, mankind, all of us, became self-centered, and now our bodily desires control us. They drive us. So let's put it this way, Larry, that appreciative, first there was woman, and she walks by Adam, and he goes, woman. And then after a while, it was like, whoa, man. And then after that, in humanity, it became, whoa, mine. Ooh. That's the coveting thing that begins to become dark and twisted. And the problem is flesh-driven desires can even turn a spouse into an object of lust, dehumanizing them, missing God's intent of selfless intimacy between a couple. Do you see how that goes?
I do. I think that that's oftentimes the problem within marriages, because we lose interest in each other because we are so stimulated by things outside of the relationship that replace the relationship itself.
And a spouse will easily pick up on the fact that they're being used, not loved, and that becomes a source of conflict in a marriage. And so you want to fix that. Stop using your partner for whatever your needs are and start working to meet their needs in a loving way. That's a really good way to help build a strong marriage. But really what it comes down to, Larry, is, and I found this in my own life. I mean, I'm preaching to my own choir here, okay? This is a battle for the mind. Now, I've often heard a quote from Martin Luther, which is this: a bird can fly over my head, but I don't have to let it make a nest in my hair, okay? I can look at a beautiful or a handsome person and I can appreciate their form. I can say, wow, I just love her skin, her hair is beautiful, her shape is lovely, etc. That's fine. But there's a fine line between woman and whoa, man, and whoa, mine. And that's where the rot starts, is right crossing that line. And before the lustful thought can take hold, the mental brakes have to be applied, because once our thought turns to lust, Jesus says that the command has already been broken.
Well, and I think lust pretty much is almost like an addictive drug. Like so many of these things I think we've mentioned before, but it's so addictive. And once you're addicted to something, it takes a lot of work, sometimes outside help, to get us out of that addiction. Now, you had a great analogy on this. I think you had mentioned something to me about a reactor.
Yeah, when I was doing some research on this topic that I wanted to share with some folks, God brought to my mind the picture of a nuclear reactor. Now, a nuclear reactor can produce an incredible amount of power. In fact, just within that building, it holds an incredible amount of dangerous radioactive components that, if they're under control and all the control systems are in place, you can produce power that benefits a lot of people. But as we saw back in, I think it was 2013, the Japanese reactors at Fukushima, the cooling system broke down, the controls broke down, the control rods in there started heating up, producing hydrogen, and it literally blew up the buildings. For the last 3 years, they've been pumping water to keep those control rods cooled down because, and they're afraid this has already happened to a couple of the assemblies, the control rods get so overheated that they melt together and literally start melting their way and burning their way into the ground. It's hit the groundwater, so now the groundwater that's flowing into the Pacific is highly radioactive, and they have tracked this radioactivity all the way across the Pacific. At this point, and I just read an article about this the other day, there are some points of the Pacific that are devoid of life because of the radioactivity that's in the environment. Well, this is very much what pornography does. Because within a person, those sexual desires, okay, that God has given us and He's blessed them, if they're kept under a control and tight control system, they're very beneficial to a married couple. It builds intimacy and bonding, all those wonderful things.
But there is a tendency within our culture who do not want any controls. In fact, anything moral seems to be passé. It's wrong. It's old thinking. It's old school, right?
Yeah, well, I'm old enough to remember, well, I was extremely young, the 60s, but growing up as an elementary student, I mean, I heard the phrase, if it feels good, do it. Right? Well, that's a really harmful philosophy, because if it appeals to your selfishness and your desires, then it must be okay to do. No, it isn't, because some of your selfish desires can harm other people. You don't have that right to do that. That's the control system God has put on us. Control your desires. If it's hurting another person, that's not love. And God has said, this is the core. Love God, love other people. But this philosophy that really erupted in the 60s and came to fruit in the 70s is all that, hey, you don't need those restrictions. You don't, those boundaries are concerned. You're just a bunch of sexually repressed Puritans, and just let it all hang out. And you know something? We're eating the fruit of that in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, 2010 with all of the relationship problems. Did you know, and I'm going to throw this one out there, did you know that young men of today are having really difficult time finding intimacy in relationships because they have let pornography set the standard for what should be proper in a relationship? As a result, they expect things from women. Women expect to be expected to do certain things, and suddenly relationships break down because it's not compatible with what love is. It's become a horrible situation. Some guys cannot become aroused in a sexual relationship with their wife because their wife doesn't match the pictures or the actions of what that pornographic actress was doing. And it's destroying relationships.
Well, along with that, it's also creating diseases that are not being able to be controlled. The STD epidemic amongst young people, venereal disease, all of these things are a result of improper use of sex. So God brings it to a point in His Word that tells us that He's going to control it, and this is one of the reasons why.
Yep.
From the relationship destruction to the disease and so forth, correct?
Mm-hmm, exactly. And getting back to our analogy, if we don't control the reactor within us by guarding our thoughts or desires, these things can easily push us beyond godly containment pools, so to speak, and we go into full sin meltdown. And I can tell you there are people who are listening in on our conversation here who have experienced that same thing. I can talk to you about people in my life and points in my life where I was hitting this moment of full meltdown. And if God hadn't taken my wife and I through a very specific process of dealing with these situations, I'm pretty sure at this point, and my wife agrees with me, that we would have probably been divorced after a year and a half. But because of the process God walked my wife and I through, we set the foundation for a relationship that is now past the 33-year mark. And this is what God wants. We have to have controls dictated by God because He knows how we work, okay? He knows men are visually stimulated. He knows that women are generally stimulated emotionally, but both of us are susceptible to pornography. Now, while a glance may power up a man to lust, to flirt, or hint of an emotional boost can power up a woman to that same kind of lust, we have to keep these things under control, because if unleashed, those thoughts can lead to actions in word and deed, and the nuclear chain reaction starts.
Well, I think next time, because we're both getting busy, it's more and more people coming in, but let's talk about the triggers. Let's talk about the selfishness. Let's talk about some of the things that people can do to kind of put into place these controls around this very powerful urge.
Okay, sounds good. This is Jay, the Truth Barista, thanking all of you who have faithfully made us your weekly habit. Please consider how you can help us by sharing our podcast link, truthbarista.com, with your Facebook friends. The more people we can bring in to this virtual coffee house, the more people will know how good it is to be there. Share us often as you post things on Facebook. Our website is Truth Barista, TruthBarista for all you out there, truthbarista.com.
People are always searching for a key idea, motivation, or inspiration. God tells us that if you seek for Him with all your heart, you will find Him. Pursuing God is the greatest reward that you'll have in life because His promise to you is you will find Him. Thanks for joining us.
This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast. The best way to find out when a new podcast drops is through RSS feed. Go to our website, look for the RSS button, press it, and then enter your email. You'll be notified when a new podcast drops. Thanks for listening.